Thanks for joining us at Right On Replicas, where we're proud to bring you the best scale model kit reviews on the planet.
This review is brought to you in part by Dean's Hobby Stop in Owasso, Michigan. Dean's has one of the Midwest's largest selections of used kits at great prices. They also feature new kits and supplies as well. Call Dean's to get their mail order list featuring hundreds of vintage kits, or check their website for great deals on both new and classic models. This review is the M41 Walker Bulldog. It's a 76mm gun tank, an American design developed for armed reconnaissance purposes. It was rushed into production by Cadillac Motor Division in response to the outbreak of the Korean War. Over 5,000 were built between 1951 and 1954. Now, although engineered as a reconnaissance vehicle, the M41's weight and armament made it effective as a close infantry support role item and was useful in rapid airborne deployments. The Tamiya kit here was first introduced in 1964. It's had many reboxings, new parts and figures added in the 70s, and it had several releases until this version that was made in 2018. The sprues have a 1973 date molded into the plastic though, and the kit has 136 parts molded in green, poly, and has vinyl tracks. When the kit is finished, it's about 9.5 inches long, 3.5 inches wide, and 3.5 inches tall. And I think I hear Newt, our program director, tapping on the glass there with a question.
Wow, Cadillac has come a long way since then.
Well, that's probably true, and I don't think it had the kind of ride that you associate with Cadillac, but at the time, Cadillac was able to produce the numbers required for the war effort. Here are the contents of the kit. You can see the tracks laid out there and the pieces, as well as the polycaps on the right. Now, we'll be using mostly thin, extra thin cement to put this one together. Sometimes we'll use some super glue, but please remember to use the safety and guidelines from any of the parts or products that you see in the review. Here are the decals for the kit. The register is good, and they're marking for several different liveries of the vehicle, and you'll find that using plenty of warm water and then some setting solution over the decals will help it conform to any contours on the body. So we can begin construction at step 1. So gather the lower hull, the sprocket shafts, the tow hooks, and the bulkhead. And there's some seam lines there to clean up, but not much flash for a kit of this old design. And I'm using some Tamiya extra thin for most of the assembly. So glue the bulkhead into the lower hole and in the slot shown there. And it only fits in one slot, so now glue the sprocket shafts to the back sides of the lower hull and the tow hooks to the front of the lower hull. Next, remove the road wheel sprockets, idlers, return rollers, tail lights, tow hooks, and polycaps and accessories from the sprues. Clean up any imperfections on the parts, and now place a polycap in between the inner and outer road wheel and glue them together. And do the same for the sprockets and the idlers. Now slide the inner return rollers onto the outer return rollers, and I didn't use any glue on the return rollers to make it easier to paint them, and I didn't place the roller sprockets or road wheels on the lower hull at this time. Now glue the tail lights, the tow hooks, and the accessories to the back of the lower hull. You can gather up these pieces for the main gun and clean those up of parting lines and sprue attachment points. And glue the barrel halves together and clean up the glue seam while keeping the barrel round. Make sure that you keep it together. Now glue the barrel to the mantlet and the pivot there. Locate all these turret parts and the barrel that was subassembled, and remove any imperfections, parting lines, etc. And sandwich the gun barrel assembly between the turret halves and glue the halves together without getting glue on the gun parts so it can move. Now glue the M2 machine gun parts together, and I decided to paint those separately so I didn't attach them to the turret at this time. glue the hatch hinges to the turret, and with the hatch in between them, without getting any glue on the hatch so that, it can open and close. Now glue the handles, the gas cans, the eyelets, antennas, and accessories to the turret. I think, they're rather fine pieces and they can be broken easily, so I put them on later here. And you can opt to paint them separately, but I glued them on now because I think it blends in better when they're painted along with the tank. Now it's time to gather up the upper hull parts and clean those up, again, of any parting lines, light sinks if you find any, or attachment points, and glue the exhaust pipes inside the upper hull and press the barrel lock into the upper hull bracket without using glue so it can be positioned. And now glue the lights, the guards, the hatch, and the accessories into place. And I show the turret in place to test the fit of the barrel lock here. Okay, so we're at the point now where we're going to test fit where the upper and lower hulls go together. So look for the locating points and then use some good, contact points to add some glue to those locations, and go ahead and press the upper and lower halves together and let that set and dry so that it can be ready for paint. Now I decided to use this nicely detailed and rather inexpensive tank to apply some of my weathering. So to do some hairspray chipping, I painted the model in a rust color, and the base color should be an enamel or a lacquer to ensure that the hairspray doesn't affect its color. I have used acrylics and waited at least a day before hitting it with hairspray, and it worked out good, but enamel is pretty durable. So I used some Testors enamel rust for this one, and I let it set and dry. While the rust color was drying on the tank, I used some candle magic to put the track ends together. That's right. Using that as a heat source and a small blade screwdriver, I placed the pins into the holes at the ends and melted the pins over the holes, fixing the ends into place. After the rust color had dried on the tank, I sprayed some Tresemme No. 3 Hold hairspray in the areas I wanted to chip. Hairspray dries quickly, so after that I gave the tank and the wheels a coat of Tamiya olive drab green. Now, after that had dried, I placed the decals using warm water and a setting solution over the flat paint with no issues. The decals should be placed before weathering because the markings on the tank get beat up too. While the decals were drying, I painted the road wheels with some rubber black paint. Next, I painted the tracks with some rust enamel and then wiped off the tread area and set it aside to dry. Now here you'll see some lighter colored areas along some edges and some of the defined features there. And that's the result of some of the chipping technique that I did. And I used an old Testors brush that had the bristles cut off short to stipple with, about a 1/4 inch, and some water, and I started chipping the paint. I chipped off the high traffic areas like the hand tools and around the hatches, and high wear areas like fenders and edges and sides. And I made sure to damage some of the decals as well, and you can see some of the results here. And after I completed the chipping process to my satisfaction, I glued the return rollers to the tank, and then I used some PVA glue thinned with water and spritzed with rubbing alcohol to break the surface tension, and placed a very fine dust on areas that I wanted to show dried mud and dust. Then I added some Tamiya brown panel wash, that's a kind of a panel line wash that's used, to the model, and detailed some of the parts with some metallic gray, rusted up the exhaust and track parts. Then I coated everything with a highly diluted buff color for a dust effect, and then flat coated the entire tank. I painted the wheel nuts yellow and got them ready to place on the tank. Next, I pressed the sprocket and idler wheels on, and then stretched the tracks over the sprockets, return rollers and idlers, and then pressed on the road wheels inside the track. The polycaps don't need any glue, so then I dusted up the wheels and the sprockets using Tamiya washes, brown and black, and some fine dust. Then I coated the unit with Tamiya flat clear. Now I set the turret and gun onto the tank, and that looks pretty good altogether, I think. With the tank finished, it's time to clean up the figures and all of their accoutrements. Glue the arms on the figures, and the tank commander has an optional arm you can pose if you want. I positioned the arms of the infantrymen to hold their firearms, and next I glued the grenades, pack, and canteen to the infantrymen. Finally, I glued the bayonets to the rifles. I sprayed the figures with a coat of olive drab, and then hand painted the helmets in olive green and some of the details with some khaki drab. Next, I painted the boots black with some brown scuffing, and their skin was a Tamiya flat flesh with darkened recesses of brown wash. I painted the eyes white and irises brown. I painted the goggle lenses on the binoculars black, and after the figures looked the part, I gave them a coat of Tamiya flat clear, and after that had dried, I added a little clear gloss to the goggle lenses and the binocular lenses, and I painted the guns with some gunmetal, and the stocks were deck tan with a brown wash. And that's to simulate the wood stocks, and the bayonet blades were then painted steel color. I placed the guns in the hands of the infantrymen. Here are the parts that I had left over. I didn't use the plastic base cards to glue the infantrymen's feet to, and the spare arm and the other part weren't used. There are some decals for the other versions of the tank for other countries, etc. Well, there you have it. Your kit is finally finished along with the figures, and it went together pretty easily. It's a nicely detailed kit for the money, which is pretty inexpensive. There's very little flash on it, and you can buy them just about everywhere online, even though they're out of production. They're still plentifully available. It's a good kit to practice some weathering on, as you see, and some nice figures to practice with too. The ease of assembly makes it suitable for just about anybody, and it's a low-stress, easy-to-build kit. And if you make a mistake, that's called battle damage. Well, we hope you liked this step-by-step model kit review, and so that you don't miss any more, please subscribe to our YouTube channel. You can do that by clicking on the icon in the lower right hand of any of our reviews, or you can find us on Facebook or our website, rideonreplicas.com. Thanks.